My entitled uncle told me to sign over my inheritance or he'd destroy my reputation, so I recorded him, and now he's lost everything. The envelope arrived certified mail on a Thursday morning in late September, thick and official-looking, with a law firm's return address embossed in gold. Inside were 6 pages of accusations so detailed and specific they made my hands shake as I read them. According to my Uncle Raymond's attorney, I had stolen $48,000 from my late grandfather's estate, forged documents to inflate my inheritance, manipulated Grandpa during his final months to exclude other family members, and engaged in elder abuse so systematic it bordered on criminal. None of it was true, not a single word. But the letter concluded with a simple ultimatum. Sign over my entire inheritance to Raymond within 30 days, or these allegations would be filed with the probate court, reported to the police, and shared with every member of our extended family. My phone rang before I'd finished reading. Uncle Raymond's voice, smooth and confident, said, I said nothing, just hit record on my phone's voice memo app and let him keep talking. I'd been Grandpa's primary caregiver for the last 2 years of his life, ever since the stroke had left him partially paralyzed and unable to live independently. I was 28, working remotely as a software engineer, and Grandpa had been the one person in my family who'd actually supported my decision to skip the traditional career path everyone expected. When he'd gotten sick, moving in to help him had felt natural, inevitable even. My parents lived across the country, my sister was stationed overseas with the military, and Uncle Raymond, Grandpa's only son, claimed his real estate business kept him too busy to help with daily care. So I'd rented out my apartment, moved into Grandpa's guest room, and spent 2 years managing medications, physical therapy appointments, meal prep, and the slow, grinding work of keeping an 89-year-old man comfortable and dignified as his body failed him. Grandpa had been lucid until the end, sharp-minded and stubborn, and we'd developed a routine that worked. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoon card games, evening news with running commentary. He'd been my favorite person long before I became his caregiver. Those 2 years just cemented it. Grandpa had died in June, peacefully in his sleep, exactly the way he'd wanted. The funeral had been well attended, respectful, unremarkable, except for Uncle Raymond's eulogy that had lasted 20 minutes and focused mostly on Raymond's own childhood memories rather than Grandpa's actual life. The will reading had happened 3 weeks later, conducted by Grandpa's longtime attorney, a meticulous woman in her 60s named Barbara Keene, who'd handled his affairs for 30 years. The terms were straightforward. The house and remaining estate, valued at approximately $320,000 after debts and funeral expenses, would be split 3 ways: 1/3 to Uncle Raymond, 1/3 to my mother, Raymond's sister, and 1/3 to me directly as thanks for my caregiving. My sister would receive Grandpa's coin collection, valued at around $15,000. The will had been updated 4 months before Grandpa died, signed in front of witnesses, notarized properly, completely legal. Uncle Raymond had sat through the reading with his jaw clenched, saying nothing, but I'd seen the calculation in his eyes. He'd expected to inherit everything, or at least the majority. The idea that I, his nephew, would receive an equal share had clearly never occurred to him. The first hint of trouble had come 2 weeks after the will reading. Uncle Raymond had called, asked to meet for lunch, said he wanted to discuss the estate distribution. We'd met at a steakhouse downtown, Raymond ordering expensive bourbon, talking about real estate markets and investment opportunities until the appetizers arrived. Then he'd shifted, casual but pointed, saying Grandpa probably hadn't been in his right mind those last few months, that the will update was suspicious timing, that maybe we should consider a more equitable distribution that reflected Raymond's position as the actual son rather than a grandchild who just happened to be around at the end. I'd pointed out that Grandpa had been evaluated by his doctor 2 months before updating the will, declared competent, that the attorney had ensured everything was legitimate. Raymond had smiled, finished his bourbon, and said, quote 1. The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. I'd paid for my own lunch and left. The escalation had been gradual, but deliberate. Raymond started calling other family members, planting seeds of doubt about my time with Grandpa, suggesting I'd isolated him from the family, questioning whether I'd really needed to be there full-time or if I'd been taking advantage. My cousin Alicia called me in August, confused, saying Uncle Raymond had told her I'd prevented Grandpa from seeing visitors those last few months. That was a lie. Grandpa had seen whoever wanted to visit, which frankly hadn't been many people. Raymond himself had visited maybe 6 times in 2 years, always briefly, always with some excuse about work obligations. But the narrative Raymond was building didn't require truth, just repetition. By late August, I'd heard from 4 different relatives asking why I'd been so controlling, why I hadn't let them help more, whether I'd really needed to update the will so close to Grandpa's death. The insinuations were poisonous, designed to isolate me, make me defensive, cast doubt on everything I'd done for Grandpa. I'd tried explaining, defending myself, but every conversation felt like I was losing ground. The certified letter had arrived in September, exactly 38 days after that lunch meeting, and reading those detailed accusations felt like a punch to the gut. Raymond's attorney had clearly spent weeks crafting them, pulling together fragments of truth and twisting them into something sinister. Yes, I'd helped Grandpa with his finances during the caregiving period. Yes, I'd been present when he'd updated his will. Yes, I'd encouraged him to see his doctor regularly, which sometimes meant limiting visitors when he was too tired or sick. Raymond had taken every legitimate action I'd performed and reframed it as manipulation or abuse. The letter claimed I'd forged Grandpa's signature on bank documents, stolen cash from his wallet, pressured him to exclude Raymond's children from the inheritance. The whole thing was fiction, but it was detailed fiction, the kind that could cause real damage even if eventually disproven. The 30-day deadline to sign over my inheritance wasn't negotiable, the letter stated. After that, the allegations would become public, and my reputation would be destroyed whether I was guilty or not. Raymond's phone call that morning had been equally calculated. "Listen, I know this seems harsh," he'd said, voice sympathetic, almost paternal. I'd stayed silent, letting him talk, watching the voice memo timer count upward. At minute 3, Raymond's tone had shifted, less sympathetic, more threatening. Quote, 4. Minute 5, I finally spoke. Quote, 5. Raymond had laughed, cold and dismissive. Quote, 6. I'd sat in my kitchen for an hour after that call, replaying the recording, my mind racing through options. Fighting Raymond in court would be expensive, exhausting, and public. Even if I won, the accusations would follow me forever, whispered at family gatherings, Googled by potential employers. But signing over the inheritance felt like letting him win, like betraying Grandpa's explicit wishes, like admitting to crimes I hadn't committed. I thought about Grandpa's last coherent conversation with me 3 days before he died, when he'd held my hand and said, "Don't let Raymond push you around, kiddo. He's always been a bully. Stand your ground." I thought about the 2 years I'd spent feeding him, bathing him, managing his pain, sitting with him through the bad nights when he couldn't sleep and just needed company. That inheritance wasn't a windfall. It was compensation for caregiving most of the family had been too busy to provide, and Raymond, who'd barely visited, who'd spent those 2 years building his real estate empire while I put my life on hold, thought he deserved it all. The injustice of it made my stomach burn. I called Barbara Keene that afternoon, the attorney who'd handled Grandpa's will, and explained the situation. I read her portions of Raymond's letter, played her the recording of his phone call. She listened in silence until I finished, then said, "This is extortion. Raymond is threatening to make false accusations unless you surrender property you legally inherited. That's a crime. You need to document everything he said, preserve all communications, and consider reporting this to the authorities. But first, let me review the allegations in detail. If he actually files these claims in probate court, we'll need to respond with evidence proving they're false. Do you have records from your time caring for your grandfather? Medical documents, financial statements, anything showing you acted appropriately?" I did. 2 years of meticulous record-keeping, because I'd known even then that Raymond might cause problems. Every medication administered, logged. Every doctor's appointment, documented. Every expense I'd covered, receipted. Grandpa's bank statements showing no unusual withdrawals. Medical evaluations confirming his competence. Witness statements from his hospice nurse and physical therapist praising the care I'd provided. I'd kept everything, partly out of habit, partly out of some paranoid instinct that I'd need to defend myself someday. Barbara scheduled a meeting for the following Monday, told me to bring everything I had, warned me this could get ugly. Quote 9, she said. Quote, 10. I asked what that battle would cost. She estimated 20 to 30,000 in legal fees if it went to full litigation, possibly more if Raymond dragged it out. Almost half my inheritance just to defend keeping it. The math made me sick, but signing it over felt worse. I told Barbara I wanted to fight. She said, quote, 11. That weekend, I compiled 2 years of caregiving documentation into organized folders, digital and physical. Medical records from Grandpa's primary care physician, Dr. Nathan Cross, including cognitive assessments done 6 weeks before the will update, showing Grandpa scored 28 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination, well within normal range. Financial statements from his bank showing regular deposits, no suspicious withdrawals, complete transparency. Emails between me and Grandpa's hospice nurse, a compassionate woman named Lillian Burke, who'd visited 3 times a week during his final months, discussing care strategies and medication adjustments. Photos from those 2 years showing Grandpa smiling, engaged, surrounded by family during holiday visits that Raymond's narrative claimed never happened. I had proof of everything. Raymond's accusations would collapse under scrutiny. But Barbara had been right about the ugliness. Even groundless accusations caused damage. I'd already felt it in conversations with relatives, that subtle shift in tone, the questions that shouldn't need asking. If Raymond filed his allegations publicly, that damage would multiply exponentially, regardless of eventual vindication. Monday's meeting with Barbara lasted 3 hours. She reviewed every document, cross-referenced statements, built a defensive strategy that was thorough and devastating. Quote 12, she explained, spreading documents across her conference table. Quote 13. She paused, studying my face. Quote 14. I understood what she was suggesting. I needed Raymond to incriminate himself more thoroughly, on record, in ways that left no ambiguity about his intentions. I'd been recording every interaction with Raymond since that first phone call. State law allowed one-party consent for recordings, and I'd consulted with Barbara about legality before continuing. The recordings were admissible as evidence, but what I had so far was damning without being definitive. Raymond threatening to expose accusations, demanding I sign over the inheritance, using language that suggested extortion, but could theoretically be interpreted as genuine concern about estate fraud. What I needed was Raymond explaining his real motive, admitting the accusations were false, demonstrating clear intent to manipulate me through threats. Barbara suggested I request a face-to-face meeting, record the entire conversation, and try to get Raymond talking about his actual goals. Quote 15, she warned. Quote 16. It felt manipulative in ways that made me uncomfortable. But Raymond had started this fight by threatening to destroy my reputation with lies. Manipulating him into revealing the truth seemed like fair play. I texted Raymond on Wednesday, quote 17. His response came within minutes, quote 18. I confirmed, then called Barbara to let her know. She coached me through conversation tactics. Stay calm, ask open-ended questions, let Raymond explain his reasoning in detail, express doubt about the accusations, but curiosity about his perspective, she said. I spent the next 2 days rehearsing, practicing staying composed, preparing my phone to record discreetly. Friday afternoon, I drove to Raymond's real estate office, a renovated warehouse downtown with exposed brick and expensive minimalist furniture, the kind of space designed to project success and intimidation simultaneously. Raymond met me in his private office, all glass walls and leather chairs, gesturing for me to sit while he poured bourbon from a crystal decanter. None for me, I said. I want to think clearly about this. He smiled like that was exactly what he'd hoped I'd say. Let's talk honestly, Raymond began, settling into his chair, bourbon in hand, every inch the successful businessman dispensing wisdom. Your grandfather was a good man, but he made a mistake at the end, leaving equal shares to you and me. That doesn't make sense. I'm his son. I built my career following his advice, stayed close to him my whole life, supported him in ways you're too young to understand. You showed up for 2 years at the end, yeah, and I appreciate that, I do. But that doesn't entitle you to a third of his estate. It just doesn't. Grandpa was confused, sick, probably not thinking straight when he updated that will. You were there constantly, in his space, probably suggesting things without realizing how much influence you had. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm saying the situation was inappropriate, and the result needs to be corrected. I let him talk, watching his face, the smooth confidence of someone who genuinely believed his own narrative. My phone sat in my pocket, recording every word. I asked, carefully neutral. So you really think Grandpa wasn't competent when he changed the will? Raymond leaned forward, warming to his topic. Of course he wasn't. The man had a stroke 2 years before he died. You don't just bounce back from that at 89. His judgment was impaired, he was vulnerable, and you were the person controlling his environment. Maybe you didn't consciously manipulate him, but the effect was the same. He updated his will to benefit you because you were there, because you'd positioned yourself as indispensable, because he was confused about what was fair. That's elder influence, whether you want to call it that or not. And now I'm trying to fix it before it becomes a legal nightmare for everyone. I kept my expression uncertain, conflicted. But the doctor evaluated him. Barbara showed me the cognitive test results. He was competent. Raymond waved that away dismissively. Doctors can be fooled. Those tests don't capture everything. I knew my father for 63 years. You knew him for 2. I'm telling you, he wasn't himself at the end. And if you force me to prove that in court, I will. I've already talked to 3 medical experts willing to testify that stroke victims often display cognitive impairment that standard tests miss. I've got witnesses who'll say Grandpa seemed confused during their visits. I've built a case that will absolutely hold up in probate court. I felt my pulse quicken, but kept my voice steady. What witnesses? Who said he seemed confused? Raymond's smile was cold now, satisfied. Quote 30. My mind flashed to November, remembering Alicia's visit. Grandpa had been tired that day, recovering from a minor infection, had dozed off mid-conversation. But he definitely recognized her, had asked about her kids by name, had been completely lucid once he'd woken up properly. Raymond was taking fragments of ordinary elderly behavior and constructing a narrative of incompetence. And he was willing to coach witnesses to support that narrative. I asked, "So you're going to tell people what to say in court?" Raymond laughed, not bothering to deny it. "I'm going to help them remember accurately. People's memories are unreliable. They need guidance to recall events correctly." That was it. That was the moment the recording captured everything I needed. Raymond admitting he was manufacturing witness testimony, acknowledging he'd built a case rather than discovered evidence of actual wrongdoing, revealing his intent to manipulate probate proceedings with coached statements. I pushed a little further, needing absolute clarity. Quote 33. Raymond set down his bourbon, leaned back, steepled his fingers in that condescending gesture I'd learned to hate. Then it becomes a credibility contest. Successful businessman and grieving son versus nephew who stood to gain financially. Judges are human. They understand family dynamics. And here's the thing you're not getting, kiddo. Even if you win in court, you lose. Because I'll make sure everyone knows you fought me for that money. I'll tell everyone you refused to do the right thing, that you valued inheritance over family relationships. I'll make you the villain in every conversation. Your mother will hear about it. Your sister, every cousin, every friend of the family. You'll spend the next decade defending yourself at every gathering, explaining why you chose money over your uncle's reasonable request. Is that really worth $100,000? The threat was explicit now, the extortion undeniable. Raymond wasn't concerned about Grandpa's competence or the will's validity. He wanted the money, and he was willing to destroy my reputation to get it. I let the silence stretch, watching him watch me, seeing the calculation in his eyes. He thought he'd won, thought I was going to fold under the weight of social pressure and manufactured accusations. I made my expression defeated, uncertain, exactly the vulnerability Barbara had suggested. "This is a lot to process," I said quietly. "The deadline's October 15th. That's only 10 days from now." Raymond nodded, sympathetic now that he sensed victory. "I know it's fast. But the longer this drags out, the worse it gets for everyone. Sign the papers, transfer your share to me, and I'll make sure the family understands you did the right thing. No accusations, no court battles, no drama. Clean and simple. I'll even throw in an extra 10,000 from my share. Call it a thank you for the caregiving. You walk away with that, plus your dignity intact. Seems like a good deal to me. $10,000 for 2 years of caregiving and surrendering my rightful inheritance. The insult was almost impressive in its audacity. I stood slowly, like someone who'd been emotionally battered into submission. Quote 38. Raymond stood too, extended his hand, smiled like we'd just concluded successful business negotiations. Monday works, but that's the final deadline. After that, I file everything, and it gets ugly. I don't want that. You don't want that. Do the smart thing, nephew. I shook his hand, walked out of his office, drove 3 blocks to a coffee shop, and sat in my car, shaking with adrenaline and rage. The recording was crystal clear. Raymond manufacturing witnesses, threatening reputation destruction, admitting his case was built rather than factual, offering payment for my surrender. It was everything Barbara needed, everything a judge would need to see this for what it was. Calculated extortion by a man who valued money over family, truth, or basic decency. I drove straight to Barbara's office, still shaking, and played her the entire recording. She listened without interruption, taking notes, her expression shifting from professional interest to something harder, angrier. When it finished, she sat back and said, quote 40. She pulled out her phone, started scrolling. Quote 41. She looked at me directly. Quote 42. I thought about Grandpa, about the quiet dignity of those last months, about the trust he'd placed in me to handle his care when nobody else would. I thought about Raymond's smug confidence, his certainty that threats and lies would get him what he wanted. I thought about my cousin Alicia being coached to misremember her grandfather's cognitive state, about the other family members Raymond had manipulated into doubting me. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about Raymond learning that destroying someone's reputation for financial gain had consequences. I told Barbara yes. She nodded, picked up her office phone, and dialed. 20 minutes later, we had an appointment with Assistant District Attorney Catherine Flores, a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes and elder abuse cases with 16 years of experience. Monday morning, 9 sharp. Bring everything, Barbara said. The recording from today, all your caregiving documentation, copies of Raymond's initial letter, records of every communication. We're going to show the DA exactly what Raymond tried to do, and we're going to let the criminal justice system handle it from there. That weekend felt surreal. I went through my normal routines, grocery shopping and laundry, and avoiding my phone, knowing Raymond expected a response by Monday, and I wouldn't be giving him one. The recording played in my head on loop, Raymond's voice explaining how he'd manufacture testimony, how he'd destroy my reputation regardless of truth, how he valued money over any family bond. Saturday night, my mother called. She lived in Oregon, had mostly stayed out of the inheritance situation, but her voice was tight with concern. Raymond called me today, said you've been refusing to negotiate about Grandpa's estate, that you're being stubborn and greedy. He's telling people you manipulated Grandpa, that the family needs to intervene. What's going on? I took a breath, decided this wasn't the moment for full explanation. Quote 46. Silence on her end, long enough that I wondered if I'd lost her. Then, you are good to Dad. I know that. If Raymond's causing problems, do what you need to do. I trust you. That trust, unearned and unexpected, nearly broke me. Monday morning at 9, I sat in ADA Catherine Flores' office with Barbara beside me, watching a woman in her early 40s review documents with the focused intensity of someone who'd seen every possible scam and manipulation. Her office was small, cluttered with case files, decorated with her law school diploma, and a photo of her with 2 teenage kids. She'd spent the first 15 minutes of our meeting just listening, taking notes, occasionally stopping me to clarify details. Now she was reading Raymond's initial letter, her expression darkening as she reached the accusations of fraud and elder abuse. These are specific allegations, she said. Forged signatures, stolen cash, manipulated will changes. If your uncle files these in probate court knowing they're false, that's perjury. If he's using them to extort you into surrendering inheritance, that's criminal coercion. Let me hear the recording. I played it. All 18 minutes of Raymond explaining his strategy, manufacturing witnesses, threatening reputation destruction, offering payment for my compliance. Catherine listened with her eyes closed, concentrating, occasionally jotting notes. When it finished, she opened her eyes and said simply, "I want to prosecute this case." She explained that what Raymond had done met the legal definition of extortion under state law, obtaining property through wrongful use of threatened harm. The threatened harm was filing false accusations and destroying my reputation. The property was my inheritance. The fact that he'd explicitly connected the two in his recording made the case unusually straightforward, Catherine said. She looked at Barbara. Quote, 53. Barbara confirmed he hadn't. Good, Catherine said. That gives us time to be proactive. I'm going to open an investigation today, get subpoenas for Raymond's communications with potential witnesses, interview the people he claimed would testify. If we can prove he coached them, that's witness tampering. If they refuse to lie for him, that undermines his entire case. Meanwhile, I'll have my investigator, Daniel Cross, contact Raymond for an interview. We'll see if he's willing to talk without an attorney present. People who think they're untouchable often say remarkably stupid things to law enforcement. Daniel Cross was a former detective, now working as an investigator for the DA's office, 50s and gray-haired with the patient demeanor of someone who'd interviewed thousands of suspects. He met with me Monday afternoon to get a complete statement, recording everything, asking detailed questions about my relationship with Grandpa, the caregiving period, Raymond's escalating threats. He was particularly interested in the recording from Raymond's office, played it 3 times, asked me to describe Raymond's body language and tone during different sections. Quote, 56. He said, not quite approving, but close. Quote, 57. He asked if I was prepared for Raymond to know I'd reported him. I said yes. Daniel nodded, closed his notebook, and said, expect things to get worse before they get better. Men like your uncle don't handle exposure well. He's going to be angry, probably escalate his threats. If he contacts you, don't engage, just document and report. We'll be moving fast, but these cases take time. Stay safe. Raymond found out about the investigation on Wednesday, when Daniel showed up at his office requesting an interview. He'd declined without his attorney present, but apparently Daniel had been clear about the nature of the investigation: potential extortion and witness tampering related to estate disputes. Raymond called me 4 hours later, voice shaking with rage, and I let it go to voicemail. The message was incoherent fury. How dare I go to the police? This was a family matter. I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. He was going to bury me in litigation, destroy me completely, make sure everyone knew what a snake I was. I forwarded the voicemail to Daniel and Catherine immediately. It was more evidence of Raymond's ongoing threats, more demonstration of his character. Catherine texted back within an hour. Quote, 59, quote, Barbara called that evening, said Raymond's attorney had contacted her, claimed the whole situation was a misunderstanding, that Raymond had only been trying to mediate a family dispute about estate distribution. They're trying to walk it back, Barbara explained, claiming the threats weren't serious, that the language was taken out of context, but that recording makes context crystal clear. They know they're in trouble. The next 2 weeks were a strange limbo period. The criminal investigation proceeded quietly, Daniel interviewing potential witnesses, Catherine building her case, while I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. I'd started a new software contract, remote work that let me focus on something other than family drama. But concentration was difficult. Every phone call felt potentially threatening. Every email might be legal documents. Every family interaction was colored by who knew what about the investigation. My mother had heard through family gossip that there was some kind of legal issue between Raymond and me, called asking for details. I gave her the outline. Raymond had threatened to make false accusations unless I signed over my inheritance. I'd recorded the threats, and I'd reported it to authorities. She'd been quiet for a long time, then said, "Your grandfather was so proud of you, for taking care of him, for being there when no one else could. Don't let Raymond take that away." It was the closest she'd come to explicitly choosing sides, and it mattered more than I'd expected. Catherine called on October 23rd, asked me to come to her office Friday morning for an update. I arrived to find her with Daniel, spreading documents across her desk, like evidence in a crime show. "We've interviewed 4 of the people Raymond claimed would testify about your grandfather's cognitive decline," she began. "All 4 have now given statements saying Raymond approached them, described what he wanted them to say, and suggested they misremember or exaggerate your grandfather's confusion during their visits. 2 of them refused outright. 1 initially agreed, but has now recanted after understanding they'd be committing perjury. The 4th, Raymond's business partner, is claiming attorney-client privilege and refusing to cooperate, but we've subpoenaed text messages between him and Raymond that show explicit discussion of testimony coordination. She pulled out a phone log. Raymond also contacted 3 other family members trying to build support for filing a will contest. Every conversation followed the same pattern, claiming you manipulated your grandfather, suggesting competency issues, asking if they'd be willing to support his case. None of them have agreed to testify as he wanted. His case is collapsing under scrutiny. Daniel took over, his expression more serious. The problem is timing. Raymond's deadline was October 15th. It's now the 23rd. He could file his probate claims any day, regardless of whether his coached witnesses will cooperate. Once he submits false allegations to the court, that's perjury, and we can arrest him. But that means the accusations become public record first. The DA's office would prefer to file extortion charges before he escalates to perjury, prevent the whole probate battle from happening at all. We have enough evidence now for an arrest warrant. The recording alone is sufficient, combined with witness statements about his coaching attempts. Catherine wants to move forward this week. We need your approval. Since you're the victim here, are you ready for your uncle to be arrested? The question hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. I thought about Grandpa's voice saying, "Don't let Raymond push you around." I thought about Raymond's smug confidence in his office, explaining how he'd destroy my reputation. I thought about what would happen if I said no, if I let him walk away, if I prioritized family peace over accountability. But family peace built on tolerating extortion wasn't peace at all. It was just agreement to let bullies win. I said yes. Catherine nodded and picked up her phone. The arrest happened Monday morning, October 27th, at Raymond's office. I wasn't there, heard about it through Barbara, who'd been monitoring the situation. 6 officers, led by Daniel, arriving with a warrant for Raymond's arrest on charges of criminal extortion, attempted witness tampering and intimidation of a victim. They'd seized his computer, phone records, and business files related to estate planning. Raymond had been processed, booked, and released on $50,000 bail within 6 hours. But the damage was immediate and public. Local news had picked up the story by afternoon. Prominent real estate developer arrested for allegedly extorting nephew over family inheritance. The coverage was brief but devastating, including the basic facts that Raymond had threatened false accusations to force property transfer. By evening, my phone was exploding with messages from family members demanding explanation, expressing shock, asking how this had happened. My mother called, crying, saying Raymond's wife had contacted her, claiming this was all a huge misunderstanding. I sent her the recording. She listened in silence, then hung up. 10 minutes later, she texted, quote, 68, the family fracture that followed was immediate and brutal. Uncle Raymond's siblings divided into camps, those who believed the evidence against him, and those who insisted family disputes shouldn't involve police and prosecutors. Raymond's daughter, Amy, cut off contact with me entirely, sent a message saying I'd destroyed her father's reputation over money. My sister called from her military base overseas, said she'd heard rumors, needed to know what was real. I walked her through everything, sent her copies of the recording and documentation. She listened to the full 18 minutes of Raymond explaining his strategy, then said, quote, 69. Her anger on my behalf was validating in ways I hadn't expected. She posted something vague on social media about family members who value money over integrity, and within hours Raymond's wife had responded accusing her of slander. The online argument spiraled into multiple family members weighing in, taking sides, airing decades of grievances that had nothing to do with the inheritance, but everything to do with underlying family dynamics. It was messy and public and exactly what I'd feared. Raymond's criminal trial was scheduled for March, 5 months away, and the intervening time was agonizing. His defense attorney filed motions to suppress the recording, claiming it violated Raymond's privacy expectations. Catherine fought back with legal precedent showing one-party consent recordings were admissible, especially when documenting crimes in progress. The judge sided with the prosecution, ruling the recording would be allowed as evidence. Raymond's team then tried arguing. The conversation was taken out of context. that Raymond's threats were negotiation tactics rather than criminal extortion. Catherine filed a brief pointing out that negotiation tactics, involving threats to file knowingly false court documents, constituted multiple crimes. The defense pushed for a plea deal. Catherine refused, told me later that she wanted this case to go to trial, wanted a jury to hear that recording and understand that extorting family members over inheritance was criminal, not just unethical. Too many people think family disputes are immune to criminal law, she said. They're not, and your uncle is going to be the example. The trial lasted 6 days. Raymond's defense centered on arguing that his concerns about Grandpa's competence were genuine, that his attempts to gather witnesses were legitimate investigation, that his statements to me were misinterpreted expressions of concern rather than threats. They portrayed him as a grieving son, trying to protect his father's true wishes from an opportunistic nephew. The strategy might have worked if not for the recording. Catherine played it for the jury during her opening statement, all 18 minutes, with transcripts for them to follow along. The courtroom was silent as Raymond's voice explained manufacturing witness testimony, threatening reputation destruction, offering payment for inheritance surrender. When it ended, several jurors were taking notes, faces serious. Catherine spent the next 4 days building her case. Barbara testified about the legal threats in Raymond's initial letter. Daniel described the investigation into witness tampering. Medical experts confirmed Grandpa's competence. Dr. Nathan Cross, Grandpa's physician, testified that his patient had been cognitively sharp until his final week, that the will update had occurred during a period of clear mental capacity, that Raymond's claims of impairment were medically unsupported. Grandpa's hospice nurse, Lillian, described my caregiving as exemplary, said she'd never seen anything suggesting manipulation or isolation. Raymond took the stand in his own defense, a decision his attorney had probably advised against, but Raymond's ego demanded. He tried explaining that the recording made things sound worse than they were, that he'd been emotional, that family dynamics were complicated. Catherine's cross-examination was surgical. She played specific sections of the recording, asked Raymond to explain exactly what he'd meant by manufacturing a case and coaching witnesses to remember accurately. Raymond stumbled, contradicted himself, finally claimed he'd been using hyperbole, not describing actual plans. Catherine then introduced the text messages with his business partner showing explicit coordination of false testimony. Raymond's credibility evaporated in real time. When Catherine asked if he now admitted threatening to file false accusations unless I surrendered inheritance, Raymond said no. He genuinely believed Grandpa wasn't competent. Catherine asked why, if he genuinely believed that, he'd offered to drop all accusations in exchange for property transfer rather than proceeding with a good-faith court challenge. Raymond had no answer. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Criminal extortion, attempted witness tampering, criminal intimidation. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The sentencing hearing was brief and devastating. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Eleanor Wright with 30 years on the bench, listened to statements from both sides, then delivered her decision. Quote 75. Raymond sat frozen, his wife sobbing behind him, his attorney already preparing appeal documents. But the sentence stood. Raymond was remanded immediately, led out of the courtroom in handcuffs while family members whispered and stared. I felt no triumph, just exhausted relief that it was finally over. The inheritance situation resolved quickly after the conviction. With Raymond's criminal forfeit of his share, the estate was redistributed between my mother and me per the judge's order. The house sold for $340,000, settlement of debts and expenses reducing the net to $290,000. My mother and I split it equally, then she transferred $50,000 to my sister as additional bequest beyond the coin collection. My final inheritance was $170,000, more than I'd originally been designated, money I'd defended at the cost of family relationships and public legal battle. I put most of it into investment accounts, used $20,000 to take an extended trip through Southeast Asia that Grandpa and I had always talked about but never managed, donated $10,000 to hospice organizations in his name. The money felt less like windfall and more like validation, proof that defending what was right sometimes came with tangible reward even when the emotional cost was brutal. Raymond's real estate business collapsed during his incarceration, partners dissolving their agreements, clients fleeing the scandal. His wife divorced him while he was still in prison. His professional license was revoked permanently. The man who'd threatened to destroy my reputation lost everything instead. 2 years later, I'm still processing what happened, how a family inheritance dispute became a criminal case that fractured relationships permanently. I have limited contact with half my extended family, the ones who still believe Raymond was treated unfairly, or that I should have just given him the money to preserve family peace. My mother and sister and I have grown closer, bonded by the shared understanding that some betrayals can't be forgiven or forgotten. I think about Grandpa sometimes, wonder what he would have said about everything that followed his death, whether he would have been proud or disappointed by how I handled Raymond's threats. I think he would have understood. The last thing he'd told me was, "Don't let Raymond push you around." I hadn't. I documented the pushing, reported it to authorities, let the legal system handle someone who'd chosen extortion over integrity. The recording I'd made that first phone call, hitting record while Raymond demanded I delete evidence, became the foundation of his conviction. One decision in a moment of fear had protected me completely. I still have the recording saved, backed up in multiple locations, a permanent record of exactly what Raymond tried to do. Sometimes I listen to it, hear his confident voice explaining how he'd destroy my reputation, manufacture witnesses, manipulate the family against me. It reminds me that some people genuinely believe they're entitled to whatever they want, that rules and consequences apply to others, but not them. Raymond had spent 63 years as the golden child, successful businessman, respected family leader, never facing real accountability. The inheritance dispute was probably just his latest manipulation. One more situation where charm and threats would get him what he wanted. Except this time, someone had documented everything, reported everything, and refused to be intimidated into silence. That's the real lesson from all this, I think. Evil often wins because good people stay quiet, avoid conflict, choose peace over justice. I'd chosen justice. The cost was high, relationships broken, family fractured, months of legal battle. But Raymond went to prison for extortion and witness tampering. I kept the inheritance Grandpa wanted me to have. And somewhere, I hope, Grandpa knows I stood my ground exactly like he'd told me to. The recording proved what he already knew. Raymond was a bully. And bullies only stop when someone finally says no and means it. I said no. The legal system backed me up, and Raymond lost everything he'd tried to steal, plus everything he'd built. Sometimes that's what justice looks like. Not pretty or satisfying, just necessary and right. The inheritance was never really about money. It was about honoring the man who'd trusted me to care for him and refusing to let someone rewrite that story for profit. In the end, truth won. That's all I needed. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.